For those of us who were around back in May of 1980, the Skyway disaster is something that we will never forget. It was like something out of a scary movie. Vehicles falling off of a damaged bridge into the water. And joining me now to talk about the disaster is Steve Yerrid, who actually produced a documentary about the terrible event. And Steve, in your office in Tampa, you were around back then. Why did you do this documentary?
We did the documentary because back after we did the case in 1980 in a matter that no one thought we could win, we kind of defeated the House odds. We exonerated Captain Laird with an act of God defense. It was such a historical, it was one of the largest maritime disasters in the history of the world. So from a historical standpoint, from a regional standpoint, certainly, it was a documentary that needed to be done. Many of those people have already passed away. Some have not. We were able to capture Governor Graham, Governor Martinez, the Honorable E.J. Salcinas. All those people were players back in the day, back in 1980 when all this happened, and we don't all live forever. So it'll be something for next generations to have. By coincidence, happens to be true, which makes it even better because it exonerates for all time Captain Laird.
Steve, I was actually around when it happened. I was a senior in high school, and I remember listening to Q105. You remember Q105? They were the big super hit station.
Zoo.
And they were reporting on this early in the morning after 7:30, and I was like, oh my gosh, a bus and other vehicles have fallen off the bridge. And what I want to play now is a clip of the Coast Guard giving out the Mayday signal.
Okay.
Mayday, Coast Guard. Vessel calling Mayday, vessel in distress. This is United States Coast Guard, St. Petersburg, Florida. Request your position, nature of distress, and number of persons on board, over.
This is it. All the emergency equipment out to the Skyway Bridge. Vessel just hit the Skyway Bridge. The Skyway Bridge is down.
All stations, this is United States Coast Guard, St. Petersburg, Florida. The vessel, Summit Venture, 606 foot, has hit the Skyway Bridge. Any vessels in Tampa Bay area, Skyway vicinity, proceed and assist. There are reports of people in the water. Break, this is United States Coast Guard, St. Petersburg, Florida. Out.
Steve, 35 people died in that terrible disaster. Tell us what actually happened, all the details of what happened that day.
Well, first, let me tell you that right after that, John and I got approached after we won the case by 1981, 82, 83. We got approached by several hundred, not a few, several hundred people and companies to buy our story. They wanted to make a movie, make a deal, and we wanted the truth to be told. And we could not wrest control from those people on the West Coast. So we decided we couldn't make the movie, so we stopped it from being made. A couple of years ago, a local businessman named Frankie Vanderbo came up to me and said, look, I know who you are. I know what your reputation is about the truth. If we give you total control, will you co-produce this documentary, knowing it has to be 100% accurate, subject to you making sure it's accurate? I said, sure, I will, because the story needed to be told, and it needed to be told truthfully. So in longhand, I was a 30-year-old lawyer. I had trouble finding the courthouse, so you can imagine how much I was astounded when I was on a world stage. But the state of Florida called Holland Knight, one of the most reputable firms back then, it still is today, and offered him the representation for the state of Florida. About 3 or 4 minutes later, they called Judge Germany at our office, same law firm, same gentleman who was a senior partner, and the Pilots Association offered us the representation of the pilot, John Laird. So he looked at me and he said, Steve, you can't win the pilot case, but you've had a pretty damn good career. He said, take a shot at that case and your name will be in lights. You're going to lose, so you can't possibly disappoint anyone. Are you up for that? And I said, sure, let's go. And I got on a helicopter that morning, flew out to the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, boarded the Summit Venture. There was a gaggle of people. There had to be at least 50, all surrounding this man who looked like he'd been shot, I don't know, in the face. I mean, he just had no expression on his face. He was dead man walking. And it turned out, of course, it was this good-looking Italian 37-year-old pilot who had just stunned himself and the world by what he did.
So, John, real quick, I know you're telling, John, real quick, I know you're telling the story about John, but what actually happened with the Summit Venture? How did it hit the Sunshine Skyway Bridge?
Got it. On May 9th, 1980, John Lurrow was to have his last voyage as a deputy pilot. It was aboard the Some Adventure. It was not a special morning, at least up till that time. He boarded the vessel inbound. It was light and riding high in the water because it had no cargo. All of a sudden, out of the west came a freak storm that had not been warned about. No one believed the intensity, but it hit John just as he was about to make the turn under the vessel with this large freighter. He had very few options. The only option he felt that could work was to proceed ahead and shoot for the narrow channel hole so as to avoid taking down both spans. He did that. The effect of the wind actually pushed the ship sideways, so he looked like he was steering a good course to make safe passage, but in actuality, the ship traveling over the ground was traveling laterally. And so it came off course. When the weather, it was a very quick storm, when the weather front cleared, knots, 80 knots of wind blowing him sideways. When that cleared instantaneously, like we know in Florida storms do, there in front of him was the bridge, except the wrong part of the bridge. So the bridge was struck at the anchor pier by this large vessel. It wasn't struck hard. That was the amazing part. No one could believe. But it fell apart like a box of cornflakes. 1,300 feet of the span collapsed and 35 people lost their lives. 35 innocent people because the bridge was not protected.
So Steve, the pilot, he was eventually exonerated. What happened to him after that?
It was a tragic story. He returned to piloting for about 9 months. He started limping markedly. And I noticed, and I asked him what was wrong with him. He said an old motorcycle accident, his left knee was injured. But it kept getting progressively worse. He went to doctors here in Tampa and then flew to another city, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a disease he fought very courageously for many, many years before he died. More importantly, while we won the case, he was never able to forgive himself. So he dedicated the rest of his life. This is amazing. He dedicated the rest of his life to helping others. The crisis center, the suicide hotline, teaching young kids that couldn't afford a formal education. He turned as far as he could to helping others and excluded the rest of his life to do just that.
Steve, it's an absolutely fascinating story. If people want to see the documentary, how can they do that?
It's amazing. We were going to release it on May 9th, and Prime Video, which is a big, as you know, a worldwide situation, called us and asked if we could release it early. It's now available on Prime Video. All you do, and I'm archaic, but all you do is use the search word Skyway Bridge. It pops right up. It really is 60 minutes of amazing entertainment. It's a story about a catastrophe, a courtroom drama, and the unbelievable bond John and I developed. I buried him, by the way, when he succumbed to multiple sclerosis, and I gave his eulogy. I still think of him every day.
Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.